The HOA thought they had struck gold by building 96 dream homes. But what they didn't know was that the true owner of the land had been watching all along, and they had just walked right into her trap. Imagine waking up one morning, looking out your window and realizing the land your family has cherished for generations is suddenly covered in brand new houses. Houses no one ever asked you for permission to build. That's exactly what happened to Marjorie Whitfield, a 62-year-old retired school administrator in suburban Georgia. For her, those 40 acres weren't just dirt and trees, they were family. History. Her parents had worked tirelessly to buy that land piece by piece, teaching her as a child that land was one thing you could never make more of. She remembered running barefoot through the fields, chasing fireflies at dusk, and hearing her father remind her never to let go of it. So while others sold their plots, Marjorie held firm. Developers saw the land as troublesome, uneven, tree-covered, and full of stubborn Georgia clay. But Marjorie saw something priceless. Unlike many heirs who forget about their inheritance, she paid the taxes every year, kept the paperwork in a fireproof safe, and even had her lawyer friend, Samuel Drake, check the title regularly. "Marjorie, you've got yourself a fortress here," Samuel once told her. She smiled. But she knew the truth. People with money and power always tried to bend the rules. That's why she was stunned one summer afternoon when she saw a bulldozer tearing into the edge of her property. First, she thought it was county work, but within a week, survey stakes appeared and concrete foundations were being poured. When she stopped to ask a worker what was happening, he casually replied, "New subdivision, ma'am. Lakewood Meadows, 90-something homes. Gonna be beautiful." Her stomach dropped. 90 homes on her land. At first, she thought it had to be a mistake. Surely someone had double-checked the records. Surely no developer would be reckless enough to build without permission. But week after week, she watched as entire houses sprang up, frames, rooftops, siding. She told her friends at church, and some didn't believe her. "They can't just build without asking," one woman said. But Marjorie quietly laid out her stack of documents, deeds, receipts, maps dating back to the 1950s. "They didn't ask," she whispered, "and they didn't check." Behind the scenes, the Lakewood Meadows HOA had assumed her land was vacant due to a decades-old clerical error. They bought the adjacent lots, expanded the neighborhood, and never noticed. That 40 acres still belonged to Marjorie. To them, it was an open canvas. To her, it was her legacy. Soon, the homes were selling. Families moved in. Kids rode bikes through cul-de-sacs. The HOA president, Clifford Myers, proudly told the local paper they had built the crown jewel of the county. But while Clifford was smiling for ribbon cuttings, Marjorie was quietly preparing. She wasn't angry in the loud way people might expect. She was calm, calculating. Each night at her dining table, she reviewed documents, circled dates, and drafted letters with Samuel. She knew the moment this reached court, the outcome was certain. The homes weren't theirs, they were sitting on her land. The only question was how high the price of her victory would be. The HOA thought they had one, but they had overlooked the one person who never played catch-up in life, Marjorie Whitfield. She had survived decades as a school administrator by staying one step ahead of every crisis, and she treated her land the same way. Twice a year, she visited the county office in person to check her records. The clerks often teased her for being old-fashioned. "Mrs. Whitfield, you're one of the few who still comes in person." She would just smile and reply, "That's because I don't like surprises." And this time, she was the one holding all the cards. Marjorie never had to beg to keep her land. While neighbors lost acres to foreclosure or confusing sales, she stood firm. Her parents' voices were always with her. Every spring, she walked the boundaries, sometimes with her cousin Thomas, who lived nearby. They carried a thermos of sweet, T strolled past the pine trees and checked the fences. Still yours. Marge, Thomas would say, tapping one of the old iron markers buried in the soil. Ain't nobody taking this from the Whitfields, but Marjorie knew better. Words didn't protect land, paperwork did. 3 years before the HOA even dreamed of breaking ground, she sat in her lawyer's office with a thick folder. I keep hearing chatter about survey disputes, she told attorney Samuel Drayton. Developers are circling this county like hawks. I need to make sure my land can't be touched. Samuel flipped through the folder, his eyebrows rising. Marjorie, this is better than most courthouses keep. You've got receipts, maps even, your dad's handwritten notes. I've been ready since '88, she said dryly. Together, they went line by line through the deed chain, verifying nothing had ever been sold, transferred, or placed under lien. Samuel updated her will, and at her insistence, even filed a quiet title action, essentially, a court reaffirmation that she was the uncontested owner. It was, as he called it, belt and suspenders lawyering. But that cautious move would later prove to be the very thing that saved her. Because when the HOA's bulldozers rolled past her boundary, there was already a crystal-clear, court-recognized paper trail with her name stamped all over it. Meanwhile, the HOA's leadership people like Clifford Myers, the proud, sharp-tongued president, barely noticed her. They drove past her modest ranch house without a second glance. To them, she was just another retiree with too much grass to mow. They couldn't have been more wrong. One afternoon, sitting at her dining table, Samuel laid out the stakes. They'll probably argue ignorance, he said. Claim it was a mistake, some oversight in the county files. Marjorie calmly stirred sugar into her tea. Ignorance doesn't move a bulldozer. Samuel leaned back, studying her. You understand? What this means, right? Once families move in, it won't just be about money. It'll get emotional. They'll see you as the villain even, though you're the rightful owner. Marjorie didn't flinch. I've been painted worse. They'll see the truth in court. Her calm, unsettled, even him. It wasn't detachment, it was the stillness of someone sharpening their sword before battle. As construction picked up, Marjorie didn't yell or protest. She documented. She snapped photos from the roadside. She logged dates. She even filmed trucks pouring concrete and sold signs being hammered into the ground. Every piece of evidence went into a neatly labeled binder. Lakewood Meadows. Her cousin Thomas asked why she didn't make noise. Why not chain yourself to a tree or call the local news? Because that's what they expect, she replied. Noise fades. Paperwork doesn't. And week by week, her case grew stronger. The irony was brutal. While the HOA toasted their shiny new neighborhood, the woman they had dismissed as invisible was already laying out the trap. Her taxes were paid down to the penny. Her title had been reaffirmed by a judge. Her lawyer was prepped. And her evidence binder read like a construction log. The trap wasn't something she built overnight. It was years in the making, slow, deliberate, and crafted with vigilance. Asterisk, they thought Marjorie was just a quiet retiree, passing her days in peace. In reality, she was the one person in the county they should have feared. While she fortified her defenses, the HOA pressed forward, convinced they had secured the land of opportunity. What they didn't realize was that they weren't building a dream, they were building inside someone else's fortress. For the Lakewood Meadows Homeowners Association, this was supposed to be their crown jewel. The suburban dream, rows of identical rooftops gleaming under the Georgia sun, manicured lawns stretching into cul-de-sacs, and a sparkling community pool at the center. They weren't just selling houses. They were selling status, belonging, the image of you've made it. And no one pushed that vision harder than Clifford Myers, the HOA president. Broad-shouldered, late 50s, salt-tanned pepper hair, and a reputation for charming developers over luncheons. Clifford was the kind of man who thrived on cutting corners. "We're not just building homes," he told the local paper at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. "We're building a legacy, a model neighborhood people will remember for generations." Cameras flashed. The crowd clapped politely behind the scenes. Clifford and his board were negotiating with Hanover Construction, a mid-sized builder eager to expand in Bibb County. The plan was bold: double the size of Lakewood Meadows by stretching into what county maps listed as unclaimed land. But there was a problem: parcel 1467. In one meeting, a junior project manager flipped through faded plats. "Looks like this parcel still has a name attached: Whitfield." Clifford waved it away. "Paperwork error. Some old farm long gone. We'll clean it up later." That was his style: start fast, fix later. And the board followed his lead. To them, paperwork was a formality, something lawyers could patch up once families had moved in. Who in their right mind would challenge 96 brand-new homes filled with smiling families? The expansion wasn't just about houses. It was about money and power. A larger community meant higher HOA dues, more influence, and more recognition for Clifford. Banks lined up to fund the project. Realtors hyped Phase 2 as the hottest deal in Central Georgia. Hanover Construction kept crews working 6 days a week. Bulldozers tearing through clay soil, foundations sprouting like teeth across the land. Even the mayor came out for a photo op, shaking Clifford's hand in front of the first framed house. At neighborhood meetings, Clifford painted the future. "Folks, property values are about to skyrocket. Schools will improve. Retail will move. In closer, this will be the place to live in Central Georgia." Homeowners cheered. They trusted him. They trusted the process. But beneath the applause, cracks were forming. Contractors whispered about the vague land records. A Hanover accountant flagged an acreage discrepancy. Even a county clerk mentioned to a board member that the name Whitfield still appeared in the database. Clifford ignored it all. "If we pump the brakes, we lose momentum," he told his board. "Momentum is everything. Families are ready to buy. We're not scaring them with technicalities." And so, by fall, half the homes were under contract. By winter, moving trucks rolled in, kids raced bikes in driveways, and holiday wreaths hung on fresh-painted doors to the families. It was paradise. But ambition blinds, and in this case, it blinded the entire board. They believed they were too big to fail. That if ownership issues ever came up, they could settle quickly, throw a small payout at whoever complained. Strike a quiet deal. After all, who would expect a retiree to challenge a machine like theirs? At one HOA mixer, Clifford boasted over a plastic cup of wine. "Land's land," he chuckled. "Half the time it's tied up in red tape. We just cut through it. That's how you make progress." Some residents laughed nervously. Others admired his boldness. But what no one realized was that Clifford wasn't just ambitious, he was reckless. Because while he raised his glass to celebrate, just a mile away, Marjorie Whitfield sat quietly at her dining room table, binder of evidence at her side. Asterisk to Clifford, Marjorie was invisible. To Marjorie, Clifford was writing the first chapter of his downfall. What he didn't realize was that his blind ambition wasn't just going to cost him. It was about to drag 96 unsuspecting families into a nightmare they never saw coming. By the time the first homes were halfway built, Marjorie had stopped driving by with casual curiosity. Now she drove with her phone in hand, filming everything like a schoolteacher giving a lesson. Lot 12, framing completed. Lot 14, roof installed. She whispered into the mic. It wasn't nostalgia. It was evidence. Still, the shock lingered. Standing in her kitchen one afternoon, she told her cousin Thomas, "I can't believe they just plowed right over my land like I was invisible." "They think money makes them bulletproof," Thomas said. "But you've got the law on your Sighed, "Don't let them scare you." But intimidation came anyway. The first sign was a glossy flyer in her mailbox advertising Lakewood Meadows expansion, homes starting at $299,000. Marjorie froze. The flyer's map showed her land, bold and colored in like it had always belonged to the subdivision. She let out a bitter laugh. At her next meeting with attorney Samuel Drayton, she dropped the flyer on his desk. He frowned. "They're not hiding what they're doing. They're daring you to challenge it. And that's exactly what I'm going to do," she replied. Word started spreading in town. At the grocery store, she ran into Glenda Barnes, an old neighbor. "You've seen what they're building?" Glenda asked. "Seen it?" "And it's mine," Marjorie shot back. Glenda blinked. "What do you mean yours? That land? That's my inheritance." They just didn't bother to check. Whispers turned into church gossip. A deacon told her she should just take the money and move on. But Marjorie wasn't after quick cash. She was after justice. Her first strike was a cease and desist letter drafted by Samuel. When Clifford read it, he laughed. "This woman thinks she's going to scare us with paperwork." He scoffed to the board. "She doesn't have the resources to fight us." He tossed it aside, convinced it was nothing. He was wrong. Within weeks, Samuel filed suit, attaching every scrap of proof Marjorie had saved. Deeds, tax receipts, boundary, maps, even probate records transferring the land from her parents decades earlier. The complaint hit the HOA's desk like a hammer. Clifford still shrugged it off. "It'll get tossed. These cases always do." But Marjorie wasn't a panicked retiree throwing mud at the wall. She was a strategist who had prepared years in advance. Meanwhile, families began moving in. Moving trucks rumbled through cul-de-sacs. Kids unpacked bikes, parents planted flowers. They had no idea their dream homes sat on a fault line of ownership that could shatter beneath them at any moment. One of them, Victor Ramirez, remembered overhearing two construction workers near his driveway. "I'm telling you," one said, "this land isn't clean." "There's a Whitfield name still on the file." The other shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Houses are sold already." Victor brushed it off at the time. Back at Marjorie's house, the war room atmosphere grew heavier. She and Samuel strategized daily, dissecting the HOA's legal responses. They weren't outright denying she owned the land. They were trying to argue her claim was outdated, that she hadn't actively used the property. Samuel smirked. "They're desperate. That won't hold." But Marjorie knew what was coming. "They'll paint me as heartless," she said one evening. "Like I'm trying to throw families out on the street. And you need to be ready for that," Samuel replied. "Because this isn't just law, it's optics." She was ready. Ready for whispers in church pews, for the cold looks at the grocery store, for neighbors who saw her as the villain. But she also knew this. She hadn't spent her life protecting her family's land just to hand it over to people who thought. Rules didn't apply to them. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were headlines waiting to be written. And Marjorie, calm and unflinching, was stepping into the storm with her binder of evidence and the law on her side. By early spring, Lakewood Meadows gleamed like a real estate billboard. Cul-de-sacs were paved, sidewalks poured, streetlights glowing at dusk. Families unloaded moving trucks every weekend. Kids ran across fresh driveways. Golden retrievers sniffed at the sod dot to outsiders. It looked like the American dream was alive and thriving. But under that glossy surface, the nightmare was only just beginning. The first family to settle in. The Ramirez's Victor, his wife Angela, and their two children. They had saved 4 years. Asterix families in Lakewood Meadows had stretched every dollar just to secure their first real homes. Angela Ramirez was captivated by the model kitchen the moment she saw it. "This is where we'll host Thanksgiving," she whispered, running her hand over the granite countertops. Victor signed the contract with pride. believing they had finally secured stability for their children. They weren't alone. Lauren and Tyler Briggs, newlyweds from Warner Robins, bought a 3-bedroom home near the edge of the development. To them, it was an escape from their cramped apartment. "We finally have a backyard," Tyler said, laughing as his dog sprinted across the grass. Lauren painted a nursery for the baby due in July. On another street, Darnell and Monica Price, a retired postal worker and his wife, saw their new house as a reward after decades of hard work. "This is where we'll grow old together," Monica told her sister over the phone. "We finally found peace." The HOA celebrated every sale like a victory. At meetings, President Clifford Myers boasted, "We're already 80% sold this." Community is a model for the region. Applause followed. Glasses clinked. No one dared question him, but unease slowly crept in. Rumors whispered through block parties something about a woman who claimed the land was hers. At first, people laughed. Scare tactics, one neighbor dismissed. Someone always comes out of the woodwork when money's involved. Then, the legal notices arrived. Angela found one taped to her front door, trembling as she handed it to Victor. "Is this real?" she asked. He read it twice, but the knot in his stomach gave him the answer. Meanwhile, Marjorie Whitfield drove through the subdivision on a Sunday afternoon. Children pedaled bikes down streets named after trees her family once planted. Vinyl siding, fresh mailboxes, and manicured lawns now blanketed her land. She felt no joy, only resolve. These families weren't her enemy, but they were victims of someone else's arrogance. Her fight was with the HOA and Hanover Construction. Still, tension rose at homeowners' gatherings. At one meeting, Clifford stood at the clubhouse podium, smiling confidently. "Yes, a woman is making claims," he admitted, "but our attorneys assure us it has no merit." "You have nothing to worry about," a man in the back asked, "but what if she wins?" "She won't," Clifford shot back. "And even if she tries, the county won't let 90 families lose their homes. Trust me, we're solid." Reassurance calmed some, but not all. A handful of homeowners began Googling Marjorie's name. They found her spotless tax records, probate filings from her parents, even decades-old newspaper clippings showing her family pictured on the very land beneath their homes. The truth dawned. This wasn't some random troublemaker. This was the rightful owner. Angela whispered to Victor late one night, "What if everything we've worked for disappears? What if we're squatters and don't even know it?" Victor clenched his jaw. "I'll fight before I let that happen. But if it's true, then we bought into a lie." By summer, Lakewood Meadows looked alive, children chasing sprinklers, lawnmowers buzzing, mail carriers making their rounds. But beneath the surface, anxiety spread. Homeowners quietly wondered if the ground beneath them was ever truly theirs.
For Marjorie, every sold sign was proof that her case was growing stronger. Each new house only made the mistake more costly, and she had every receipt, every map, every court filing ready to prove it. Her attorney, Samuel Drayton, filed the lawsuit in Bibb County Superior Court with meticulous precision, attaching nearly 40 years of property records. It wasn't just paperwork, it was a timeline of stewardship. No judge could ignore. Marjorie didn't announce her moves with fireworks. She didn't storm the HOA office or hang protest banners from her fence. Instead, she moved deliberately, quietly, like someone who had rehearsed this moment for years. One evening, she and Samuel sat at her dining room table, reviewing the HOA's response. A thick packet of legal jargon lay between them. "They're arguing you abandoned the land," Samuel said, flipping pages. Marjorie raised an eyebrow. "Abandoned? I paid taxes every single year while they were throwing parties." Samuel held up her neat stack of receipts. "This right here will shred their case." Word spread quickly. At first, residents dismissed the lawsuit as a rumor. Then letters began arriving, addressed simply to occupant, warning that their homes might be subject to legal action. Panic simmered. One afternoon, Angela Ramirez called Marjorie after finding her number online. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm not against you, but what does this mean for us? Are we going to lose our home?" Marjorie's voice was steady. "Angela, you should never have been put in this position. I don't want to hurt families, but I can't let the HOA steal from me. This fight isn't with you, it's with them." Angela exhaled shakily, but the truth was unavoidable. Marjorie Whitfield wasn't bluffing. She was coming for them. "I believe you. I just don't know how we'll survive if this falls apart." As word spread, pressure mounted on Clifford, Myers, and his HOA board. At a heated meeting, tempers flared. "You told us everything was fine." One man shouted. Clifford lifted his hands defensively. "It is fine. This is one woman trying to extort us. She has the deeds." Another resident yelled. "I looked them up myself." The room erupted. For the first time, Clifford's polished confidence cracked behind the scenes. Hanover Construction was losing patience. Their lawyers warned Clifford that if Marjorie's claim stood, every home already built could be tied up in court. Investors began pulling out. Realtors grew quiet. The Golden Project was rotting from within. Marjorie, meanwhile, was steady. For decades, people had underestimated Herbie because she was quiet, because she kept to herself. But she knew something about power. Real power doesn't shout. It builds quietly until no one can ignore it. Samuel urged her to stay disciplined. "You're winning this on paper, Marjorie. Don't get dragged into theatrics." She smiled faintly. "Theatrics? I just need the truth." But the pushback grew uglier. Anonymous letters appeared in her mailbox. "You're ruining families. Drop the case." Another threatened, "You'll regret this." She handed them to Samuel. He frowned, but reassured her. "This is fear talking, and fear means we're closing in." Church, a few people avoided her pew. Some whispered she was greedy, others that she was heartless. She bowed her head in prayer, remembering her parents' sacrifices, the long hours her father worked at the mill, the way her mother stretched. Every penny just to keep taxes paid. To let that legacy be erased by arrogance. Unthinkable. This fight wasn't about money. It was about respect, about family, about refusing to be silenced. The HOA doubled down, hiring a powerful law firm from Atlanta. Clifford gave TV interviews, portraying Marjorie as unreasonable. "We've offered her compensation, but she refuses to compromise. We're trying to protect families from being displaced." Marjorie shook her head at the broadcast. "Compensation," she muttered. "They never offered me a dime." The lies only sharpened her resolve. She had spent a lifetime teaching children that honesty mattered, that actions had consequences. Headlines splashed across newspapers. "Land dispute threatens subdivision." Whispers filled coffee shops, barber shops, even schools. 96 homes sat in limbo. Could a quiet 62-year-old retiree really bring down an entire HOA? The courtroom was packed. Families from Lakewood Meadows crowded the benches, clutching mortgage paperwork like shields. Realtors, bankers, county officials, everyone watched nervously. At the front sat Marjorie. She wore a simple navy dress. A neat manila folder of documents rested beside her attorney, Samuel Drayton. Her face was calm, though her chest beat hard. Across the aisle, Clifford leaned back, whispering to his team of suited lawyers, smirking, as though he still believed he could spin the narrative. Judge Patricia Long banged her gavel. "This court will now hear arguments in Whitfield versus Lakewood, Meadows, HOA, and Hanover Construction." The air thickened. Samuel stood, voice clear and steady. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Whitfield, has maintained continuous, documented ownership of this land for more than 40 years. She has paid every tax, upheld every duty, and safeguarded her rights. Yet, the defendants, without her consent and without even verifying ownership, built an entire subdivision on her property. This is not speculation. This is theft." The words hung heavy. Families shifted uneasily, some whispering prayers. Then Clifford's lead attorney rose, tone sharp. "Your Honor, while we respect Mrs. Whitfield's claim, 96 families now reside on this land. To grant her full control would cause irreparable harm to innocent homeowners. She seeks a windfall at the expense of hardworking families." Marjorie's jaw tightened, but Samuel leaned in and whispered, "Let him talk. The more he leans on sympathy, the weaker his case becomes." Witnesses took the stand. County clerks confirmed Marjorie's taxes were paid in full every year. Surveyors testified the subdivision had indeed crossed into her land. Samuel presented photographs.